مرحبا فيكم وبتمنى تكونوا بصحة وخير. في البداية بس بحب أقول الرحمة لشهداء فلسطين ولأطفالها، وإنه إحنا رغم هاي حالة الاستعمار الاستثنائية اللي إحنا بنعيشها رح نضل نمارس حقنا في الحياة وحقنا في التعبير عن روايتنا في كل الطرق المتاحة، واللي بنسويه اليوم طريقة مهمة من هذه الطرق. Hello everyone and thank you for joining us today. Despite the Israeli settler colonial attack on Palestine, we carry on and we will live our lives and tell our stories in a way or another. Today, we celebrate the book launch of Interghost by Isabella Hammad. I will not say much about the book, but here I will quote. It's an exquisite story of the connection to be found in family and shared resistance. Isabella Hammad is the author of The Parisian and Interghost. She has been awarded the 2018 Plimpton Prize for Fiction and O. Henry Award, the Sue Kaufman Prize for the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Palestine Book Award and Betty Trash Award, and she was a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35. In 2023, she was included on the Granta Best of Young British Novelists, which names the most significant British writers under 40. Also, we have tonight another brilliant writer to discuss with the first brilliant one, Daalya Taha. Daalya Taha is a poet and playwright. Her produced plays including Graduation, video reading for Maxim Gorky Theatre and LCB Berlin 2020, Hunger, a musical, Qattan Foundation, and Al-Mawrid Thaqafi Palestine 2018. There is no one between you and me, Brown University, Fireworks at the Royal Court Theatre 2015, and finally her poetry collection, The Autobiography of the People of the City of Art 2022. Please silence your phones to enjoy the night. And now let's enjoy a reading from the book by Isabella, and thank you.
How's this? Fine? Okay. The novel is about a production of Hamlet in Palestine in the summer of 2017. And I'm going to read a short passage from sort of 2/3 of the way through the book, which takes place in Bethlehem. The cast have gone to look at the set. And the protagonist is the narrator, and her name is Sونيا. And she mainly works as an actress in London. She came to visit her sister حنين in Hammad and kind of got drawn into acting in this play. And the other thing you need to know is that the young man playing Hamlet is a pop star called Wael, who has no experience of acting, but has been cast to kind of attract a big crowd. Wael was telling Jenan for the third time that she ought to go to a nunnery, اذهبي إلى دار راهبات, when a voice shouted, "Sorry, I'm late." Everyone turned at once. The lanky figure of Merjid was running towards us, wearing an Adidas tracksuit and yellow-framed spectacles, lifting dust with his sneakers. "I got an interrogation order." He was out of breath, wiping his lenses on his T-shirt. "My wife made me go back for it. She freaked out. Police in the house. Hi, everyone," he added as he put his glasses back on and did a double take. "Who are all these people?" "Open rehearsal." Mariam hesitated before switching to English and lowering her voice. "What's it for? Did they say?" Merjid handed her a folded page. The circle of people around us watched, the camp boys jostling each other, conferring. I had an odd thought that Mariam could have spoken in Hebrew, since this was a tourist town and everyone understood English, but of course the sound of Hebrew would not be well received this side of the wall. Mariam read the interrogation order, which was itself, I now saw, entirely in Hebrew, met my eye, and then met Ibrahim's. "Do you think they know your brother's still involved?" said Ibrahim. Mariam blew her cheeks out. "How?" said Wael. "Talk about it later," said Mariam. "Finish the scene first, guys." Jenan and Wael returned to their positions to complete the dialogue. Both looked rattled, particularly Jenan, which was understandable. She'd just joined us. She was feeling out our dynamic. And now not only was a new dynamic hatching, but a threat had materialized, of interrogation, of danger, of disillusion even. As far as I was concerned, if the Israelis really made an effort to stop us, it would not be worth the fight. We were mere human beings. There was only so much we could do. The only person who didn't look unnerved was Maryam, who stared at her actors as though with the force of her gaze she could make them more sturdy. I had a feeling I sometimes get when I drink too much coffee, which was that while standing still, watching Jenan and Wa'el, another, more agitated Sونيا was wriggling inside my skin, trying to get out. I was thirsty as well, and I needed the bathroom, and in this state of physical discomfort, something strange happened. My viewpoint switched. And as though I were in a dream and my perspective had been breached, I moved like a surveillance drone and saw our project from above, situated fragilely in time and space, this summer, this side of the wall. Accompanying this vision was a fear, almost a premonition, that it was all foretold anyway. Everything had been decided in advance. We were only acting parts that had been given to us, and now some inexorable machinery was being set in motion that would sooner or later throw our efforts out into the audience, dismantle our illusions, and leave us cowering before the faceless gods of fate and state. I walked a few paces over to the angled shade cast by the set and its scaffolding. Moving there heartened me. I looked up at our tall wooden stage, which had been drawn on paper and brought to life. It was strong. It would withstand the rain. It was a monument, a work, like the giant key at the refugee camp, which had been probably praised by some critic at some tent at the Biennale. It was terrible to take heart in the thought that a monument was less likely to be bulldozed than an ordinary person's home. But no sooner had I thought this than I doubted it was true. I doubted the power of what Maryam called PR, whether being photographed many times, appearing in a newspaper, could ever really protect a building or a human life when it came down to it. Valiantly, Wa'el and Jenan were carrying on, and then Jenan was completing her final speech, saying of Wa'el, "I see now that refined and noble intellect ringing as sweet bells jangle discordantly, detestably." And after the silence that signified the end of scene came the sudden fracturing of applause, and our crowd became restless, homing in on Wa'el, calling his name. Maryam announced a 10-minute break, and then we'll run the fencing scene, and then we're going home. And I watched her sit beside Jenan, making wheel-like hand gestures, taking the script from her and licking her fingers to flick it back a few pages. "I dreamt about you last night," said a voice. It was Amin, beside me, rolling a smoke. "Really? What was I doing?" I couldn't keep the edge out of my tone. His friendliness unnerved me. "Trying to remember." He ran the sticky margin of his paper over his tongue. "It wasn't about you, the dream, don't be scared. I just made an appearance. Exactly. Minor character. Right." On the stage steps, Wa'el held his jacket rakishly over one shoulder while strangers crowded around him. He leaned in for each selfie. His white smile flashed and shut, flashed and shut. He looked much more comfortable being famous than being Hamlet.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Glad to have been invited to discuss Isabella Hammad's book. And I thought we'd just start. So, Isabella, we were supposed to discuss your first book back in 2020. Then Corona happened. And in the beginning, we thought, like the rest of the world, that it was just a matter of months, and it was just a temporary thing, and we just fall back into our old lives. We thought, I don't know if you remember, but we thought the event would be rescheduled in September, something like this. And back then, we weren't prepared to the fact that a new world was unfolding, even though all the indicators were there. Except for scientists who understood the gravity of the situation, politicians or everyone else didn't take it seriously, couldn't imagine the consequences. I think I wanted to start here because this moment of not realizing that you are slipping into a new world is the word of your book itself. Sonia, your character, arrives in Palestine after being intentionally away for more than 11 years, I think. And she keeps saying, it's just a holiday. I'm on vacation, she declares. And she just wants to be nurtured by her sister. I also remember my grandfather saying this in 1948 after going to Beirut, having been driven out of Akka. He thought they were on a holiday. It was just a temporary thing. Many Palestinians said that. But Sonia realizes more and more that she's not on a holiday. Well, I think one of the things that seized me in your book is this idea of political awakening. I felt you were investigating. I felt in your book, political awakening is not just a state of being informed, of learning about the past of the history of your family or your country, but it's also about recognizing what is coming. In the end, it's a question of imagination. Well, I feel the capacity to imagine what is coming is at the heart of what it means to be politically awake somehow. Something else connected to this point, in the beginning when Sonia arrives, she says she's on a holiday, but from the beginning, from how she's searched at the airport, we know otherwise as readers. With the novel makes you feel that something is coming, that it is imminent, or that it's in fact already happening. By insinuating us this knowledge, maybe the book also releases us back into the world better capable of suspecting what is innocent. And you also direct us that we have to allow the ghosts of the past who hunt us to take hold of us in order to imagine differently. So I think my first question would be something like, how do you see the delicate balance between political awakening or personal transformation or the power of imagination?
Thank you, Dahlia. That's such a beautiful reading of the book and kind of analogies that you're drawing there. I think I am, when it comes to just the novel as a form, I am quite interested in the sort of quite old-fashioned character arcs where there's change over time, essentially. I feel like this is in some ways kind of fallen out of fashion. This is a very sort of like, an older model for the novel, that the character is transformed by the end of the novel, they've become somebody else. And I think this is also, partly actually like a dramatic form from theatre, where you have a kind of like the Greek tragic hero who has the moment of awakening and then changes, which we were talking about the other night. And I think I do think that can map on quite interestingly to political awakening and transformation. What I quite like about what you're saying is that it suggests that change can happen without you realizing it. So I think maybe, because I assume most people haven't read the novel, our protagonist is kind of ambivalent about, she's sort of left Palestine behind, whereas her sister is very political, and they have an experience when they're quite young. They're from Haiffa, when their uncle takes them into the West Bank just as the first Intifada is ending, and they have an experience there that is very formative for both sisters. But whereas Hanine becomes very politically committed, Sonia, our protagonist, kind of doesn't want anything to do with it. She finds it traumatic. And she lives her life in London. But it really has, this experience has really affected the entire family, and so has affected her in ways that she can't really realize. So when she comes to visit her sister, she's looking to be comforted by this relationship with her sister. But really it's about, she ends up confronting all these aspects of her life and herself and her family history that she's left behind, as well as her responsibility to Palestine, actually, is what it ends up kind of being about. But there are sort of several moments where our protagonist has a moment of reckoning, where she doesn't realize how much she has changed or been formed by something. And part of that is a process of becoming politically awake. I don't know if that's answered your question exactly. Yeah. Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I like that you talked about that incident, because it's one of the يعني it's an incident that marked the sisters differently, and while Haneen becomes, as you said, politically engaged or committed to the cause, wanting to remain in Palestine, Sonia distances herself from the place, focusing only on her acting career. She remains for many years oblivious to his death as well, which also brings us back to the idea of imagining otherwise. And I think also my second question had to do with this idea, because also in today's age we often come across images of violence or oppression, yet they fail to deeply impact us or raise our consciousness to question the underlying issues. I feel recognition of suffering has the power, the kind of recognition that has the power to transform us entails also a recognition or a feeling that we are actually bonded to that which feels foreign or strange, some kind of a recognition of kinship somehow. Also, I wanted to ask you about this, yani, if this was, how would you think about the relationship between kinship and the past and the possibility of politics? Can we make new pasts as well as a new kin? Is this why people from the past hunt us? And I feel yani, these two things were the question of kinship or finding yourself bonded to people you wouldn't name as family is part of the journey of Sonia.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting. I think I would answer that from two directions. One is that because much of the play is made up of the theatre troupe and the kind of the dynamics within the theatre troupe, the dramas, the falling in love, the aggression, the jealousy, the suspicion. And even though we have a narrator who's speaking in the first person, when they rehearse it, the book goes into play form and they're all discussing among themselves, so it's kind of equalized in the way, the narrative at that point. So this is the kind of, that you could argue that is the kind of kinship that you're talking about, that's very formative. When you have theatre troupes, it's a very intense experience when people put on a play together. They're spending long hours rehearsing, it's very emotional, it's very difficult, it's very physically tiring. And then in addition, they're putting it on in Palestine, where they have all these other kinds of obstacles that they have to face and other kinds of pressures, uncertainty if it's ever going to be put on. So this is a kind of a pressure cooker for the relationships. So I think and also in a way that ends up being a kind of stand-in for other kinds of organization or other kinds of political organization even, or kind of what it means to work together, to put it simply, right? And the pun on act. You are acting in a play, but you're also taking action. All those metaphors are kind of being drawn on. But then another way to talk about kinship is the family unit. I think that the novel. Well, I think that I'm very interested in how early family experiences might actually have formative political effects on us, that in fact our politics might be shaped by our relationships with our parents or certain things that we witness or experience as children, which is a kind of sort of psychoanalytic angle to take. I think also that you can also be committed to a particular ideological framework or a particular set of values in a more cool-headed way. Is that me? Hello? It's going well. Are we back? Yeah? So sorry about that. What was I talking about? Family, yeah. So I think that. So I mean, and obviously the novel is not. It's a narrative art form that examines, human relationships. So this is the way in which I examine the kind of political makeup of all of the characters. There's also a psychological makeup that also has to do with their kinship relationships with their family. There's a kind of joke line in there, which is, "Must every Palestinian story be a family story?" But I think that, in a way, it often is a family story, whether it's the Palestinian family at large with all of those dynamics, to speak sort of more generally, or our own particular families and how we relate to our ancestral histories in this place.
And going back to the idea of being bonded, or what it means or takes to bond. You know, in the beginning of the novel, when Sonia, she's in this taxi taking her from Akka to Haifا, the taxi driver is trying to engage her, and he's asking her questions about where is she from. Da, 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 da. She says there is this phrase where she remarks something along the lines where she resisted the idea of being bonded to this person. I think this moment is at the heart of the novel. And how the novel becomes a journey of a person who learns how she is bonded to people, or strangers, or family alike. I think this is going to be a longer question, but it's a theme that I also personally find interesting, because you know how the capitalist sensibility constitutes us is one that instills in us a resistance to being bonded to our families or places, neighborhoods, cities, histories, choices, responsibilities. It wants us to be these individual atoms. What I liked about the novel is the novel sees Sonia being in different kind of togetherness, making art together, being together with her sister, even like even the relationship with her sister changes, being together with her past, to being together with the people in a demonstration. And we can feel in the beginning how strange this feels to her, how alienated is she from being with others. So I felt her political, and that's what I appreciated about the novel, is that her political awakening is not an awakening only to the story of her family or her country, but also a sense of ease in being with others, with all the frustrations and hardships. It's like the novel suggests that to be politically awake as well and engaged is to insist on being in things larger than ourselves, especially in a world shaken by larger forces that keep telling us that there is no otherwise, there is no alternative. I believe only through being with others we can become other selves or other things. We have the chance to reinvent ourselves and the worlds we live in through love and friendship, sisterhood, and the people we demonstrate with. Going back to the idea of protest and demonstrations, because it's somehow an epic moment in the book. When people remember one of the greatest feelings of their lives, they remember what it felt like to be in a big demonstration, to chant with everyone, to feel so powerful, so big, to feel a sense of the possible as well. How in these moments we are also seized by feelings of love and care and belief. People find themselves suddenly bonded to strangers. They take care of the people around them, even if they don't know them. They want them to be safe. They help each other. They warn each other. They feel like they are one big family. It doesn't matter if they are alike ideologically or politically or socially. It doesn't matter if they are bad or good people. You just care about everyone. For my question, how can we sustain this way of being in our day-to-day life? How can we insist on being bonded outside the realm of the protest as a radical way of being in a world that keeps trying to tell us that we are not bonded? This is something I felt you wanted to explore in the novel.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's a huge part of the book. I don't know that I have an answer about how to sustain it outside of those contexts where the pressure of whether it's being in a play or being in a demonstration cements those bonds and make them kind of come to light. But those are significant moments in the book. Like there's one moment which you're kind of referring to, which is, I started writing the book in the autumn of 2017. And that summer there had been these protests in Jerusalem around Al-Aqsa Mosque because the Israelis were putting these electric gates, the kind of a disruption of the status quo of holy sites. So everybody was protesting in the streets by praying in the streets. And this was a very beautiful, actually quite spectacular demonstration. And I, at a certain point in writing the book, and I was thinking about spectacle and demonstration and protest and theatre, this image returned to me of everybody praying in the streets as such an extraordinary visual image. And so I put it into the book. So Soonia and her sister go and participate in this protest. And it's a kind of, it's like a transcendent moment for the character where she feels, it's a sort of actually feels like the most significant thing she ever did in her life, and it's because she becomes part of something much larger than herself in this moment, having been really an individualist, right? So as an actor in London, she's really focusing on her career in this way. So there's something of that feeling, which is perhaps, you could say, maybe what she's seeking in her acting career. She's kind of looking for that feeling, but it's not really there, right? She's sort of got it wrong. When we meet her at the beginning of the book, her relationships have all kind of broken down. She's had this really bad love affair with the director. Her relationship with her sister is full of silences and misunderstandings. And by the end of the book, she's kind of started to weave some of these relationships in more of a healthful way, which is actually kind of highly politicized. So I think that relationship between those two things is very much in the book. And it's sort of where meaning starts to be generated. But I don't know, I don't have an answer for for how we manage that, but I think it's something that I'm interested in, the ways you can explore that in a novel, I guess. Yeah.
Sorry, the question wasn't clear, but what do you think, how the novel suggests, if we can sustain this way of being in our today life?
I mean, I guess the primary relationships that the novel focuses on are among women. It's mainly Soonia and her sister and Mariam, the director. They're all kind of maternal relationships in a funny way. They're all kind of caring for each other. So maybe you could say in some way modeling modes of care for one another. They sort of all swap being each other's mum. You know, there's a kind of spectre of motherhood throughout the book.
Okay, yeah, beautiful. Okay, this is a question about also reading and writing, because I always think it's important to think of the word in which the reading happens, So personally, I believe that reading is now a radical and necessary act in a world of images. It allows possibilities of imagination or empathy that are not possible otherwise. If we want to talk about our world, it's a world of constant images, and I find it really frightening or terrifying. It's concerning that some believe that watching a video or viewing an image is sufficient to understand the complexities of a situation, such as the case of Palestine. And it's a world where we get the news of the world through images, the news of our city, the news of our friends. This reliance on images carries risks, including the potential to oversimplify or distort the context, the story, history, and truth. Moreover, diminishes our capacity to imagine or subsequently empathize. When reading a novel, there is a certain opacity that requires us to actively engage our imagination. We must envision the characters, their appearance, and even associate them with people we know, forging a deeper connection, regardless of their kindness or flaws. Considering that images often oversimplify or distort the context, history, and truth, while also limiting our capacity for imagination and empathy, does this make you more conscious of your writing? Or how do you navigate the challenge of presenting a word that encourages readers to actively engage their imagination or develop a deeper understanding, counteracting the prevalent image-centric culture?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point for writers of fiction, that you're in competition with lots of other kinds of media that are really designed to ensnare the intention in a certain way. So that puts a kind of pressure on, weaving stories that are very compelling, that will take the attention. But I think what you're saying is absolutely right, that obviously it depends on the writer. There are some writers that don't leave their reader any space to imagine. They want to define every single detail. They don't leave you any space for your own invention. But I think that some of the most beautiful and, in fact, most affecting reading experiences are ones where your mind is much more creatively engaged and you actually fill out the pictures in quite an active way. And I think that is a really beautiful element of reading, which gives agency to the reader. It's not just kind of passive consumption. It really distinguishes it from cinema, for example, as well as obviously what it means to kind of consume images on the internet, which is the main thing that people are doing all day long nowadays. So I guess it's just a kind of consciousness of that pressure, I suppose, as well as I do think that people will continue to read novels. I think that the experience of reading a novel is really also an experience of being alone with yourself. Is there anything I'm doing wrong? You okay? I turn down the volume. Is it fine? Turn it down? Okay. It's okay. I can't remember what I was talking about. So I was talking about being alone. Yeah. So what it means to be alone with yourself and to be thinking of others. This is sort of strange kind of paradox that when you're reading a novel, are you going to swap me out? Great. Thank you so much. Okay, there we go. Let's hope it doesn't happen again. You're engaged in this very active way in imagining the consciousness of other people. So it is also sort of peculiarly social in this other way. It develops our sense of otherness, or of the kind of the subjectivity of others, which is something I really am very eager to preserve as a priority in my own novel writing. I think that a lot of novels nowadays are quite close to autobiography, or they hew quite close to personal experience or to memoir. For me, the great challenge of writing a novel is to think of others, and to try and think of others with precision and with respect for difference and difference of experience. And that is something that I think only the novel. I don't know of other art forms that manage to capture that in such a way. So that's something else I think that obviously you're kind of touching on when you talk about the passivity of consuming images and thinking you know when you don't know.
No, it's true. And even when most of the images we see, like, they are also images that don't accuse or don't illustrate structures or larger forces behind this moment of pain or suffering. Well, I think, on the other hand, novels offer, and that's why they even deny, the images deny us the possibility of choice or capacity to do something about other than feeling bad or sad or I think I want to also talk about the notion of choice, because in the novel the two sisters make drastically different choices. I feel like you can say that the novel investigates what it takes to choose, who also suggests that choice lies not in ourselves, but also to be with others, to be moved, to be changed, to altered radically. Sometimes to play a role with such fidelity that it becomes real, or perhaps to stop believing that there is something outside playing a role. I wonder how, I wanted to talk about Rashid, because we talk about the choices the two sisters made after meeting and encountering Rashid, but I wanted to talk about Rashid's choice, and if you think that Rashid made a choice, if he who becomes a ghost had a choice. How does the question of what it means to choose haunts your book? What are the limits of the notion of the choice and how it is deployed politically today? Do we have a choice to be political, or do we enter into politics by some other means?
That's a great question. So Rashid is a character, a young man who is on hunger strike. He's the scene that the sisters witness basically as they are taken to go and see him. He's been released, but he's refusing to stop his strike. And he becomes symbolic. He kind of attains the status of symbol, which at a certain point in the novel, Soonia reckons with as being actually deeply unfair, that this young man's life should have to kind of attain a symbolic value, but that often happens. And so I think the answer is no, that he doesn't have a choice. He's asserting his will in that context, even though it no longer makes sense in the framework. He's continuing to assert his will, even though his mother is saying, you're killing me. But within the kind of larger framework, it is in the absence of choice. Do you agree?
I don't know yet. I feel like it's his choice hunted them.
Right. Yeah.
It's something I'm still thinking about.
Right. But isn't it? I guess it's also because it's opaque. They actually don't know why he's continuing. So it's a kind of way in which the puzzle of his continuing the strike is also what haunts them.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's the paradox of it.
Yeah, and that's why. And I think that's why it's beautiful, because when something impacts you, when you're always wondering, the fact that he was continuing the hunger strike somehow forced you to ask why, and by asking why, somehow interiority, or like you were forced to imagine the word he comes from, or the reason behind his choice, which I think that is the moment of recognition, not just empathy, or because you start to think, what if you were in his place? Why would you continue? Or I think. No.
Yeah, I agree. That's much better than my answer. Yeah.
Also, what I find intriguing about this novel is its exploration of the transformative power of choosing to be with others, to be moved, and to undergo radical changes that go beyond simply playing a role. Soonia, the protagonist, she's an actress. She's been stepping in and out of roles without, as you mentioned in the beginning, without truly having her core understanding challenge somehow. However, the novel suggests that true transformation and shedding of roles requires something to be at stake, whether it's our lives, confronting the corruption within our upbringing and families, or facing the criminal aspects within ourselves. I feel even the ending a little bit implies that to stop playing a role or experience genuine change, we must risk something from the old world and imagine the possibility of something new. Only in doing so, we open ourselves to a deeper sense of connection with things beyond ourselves, allowing us to become something entirely different rather than mere participants in temporary roles. Can you elaborate on the significance of this transformative journey and the risks involved in letting go of old roles and worlds to forge new connections of possibilities and worlds?
I don't know if I totally understand. So, you mean confronting risk, basically? Is that kind of what you mean?
Part of the reason, in the beginning you said that in her acting career, there was something, she wasn't satisfied. Whereas when she came here, something changed, and she was more open to the possibility of becoming something else by confronting her past or her relationships or the history of her family. I feel because it came with a certain risk, like something was at stake in a way that wasn't possible before in her acting career. I feel like if we want to imagine something new or like the possibility of something new, something has to be sacrificed. So that's I wonder if this is something you were thinking about.
I don't know that I was thinking. I mean, I think you always think about like raising the stakes, you know, in a narrative. So of course that they're exposed to risk in certain kinds of ways. But yeah, I would say, you know, maybe more than her sister, Sónia has sheltered herself, you could say, that in this way, by agreeing to participate in the play, that in some way she is exposing herself to a context in which she's not comfortable. She's somebody who's usually quite comfortable in her context, right? And at this point, she sort of agrees by accident to be in the play. She's quite nervous about it. You know, everything's kind of new to her. So I suppose, and then in addition, you have the kind of the political context and the heat of that very sort of tangible danger certainly makes it feel like there's something being risked. And obviously by the end you have that. I think with the ending, I wanted it to end kind of, you know, without catharsis. I was thinking largely about, you know, obviously kind of as a theatre practitioner, you know this well, you know, the kind of idea that catharsis releases an audience of their negative feelings, but that there's another way of doing things, which is actually to deny catharsis to the audience, and then they're in an ideal world, they would then rise up and you know act against their social conditions. This is maybe a little outmoded now, but I wanted the book to kind of end mid-scene in that way of denying catharsis, so to at least to gesture at that, if that makes sense.
Regarding this, because the book is a novel about a play, which is fun for me as a playwright. It raises the question for me, if you see, how do you see the possibilities or limitations of narrative form, and in this case, novel form or theatre form?
Yeah, I mean, I use the play form when the characters rehearse, in part because when you're stuck in the I, in the first person, it can be a bit like repetitive after a while. I initially wrote the book in third person. I wrote about a third or a half in third person, and then I switched to the I. It wasn't quite working in third. But I like these play scenes in part because you can get all of these voices in the room at once. And then the protagonist sort of fades a little bit. She just becomes one of many. Her sense of self is sort of suppressed in that way. And it was fun, you know. Do you have the kind of banter of the cast without the kind of clogging, moving he said, she said, and so forth.
Okay. I think the last question, could you share any personal experiences that have profoundly shaped your approach to writing?
Oh, profoundly changed my approach to writing. I think, well, I don't know if this is totally what you're aiming for, but I think it's important. I personally find it difficult to write without a sense of purpose. I think because it takes so many years to write a novel, so it requires stamina, it requires a lot of kind of determination to get through it. I think that I need to feel in some way that it's necessary, that it has some kind of purpose. So I suppose that shaped my first book. I think once you've done one book, you kind of know you can do it, and you go and do another one. But the first book, I really relied on a feeling of urgency and necessity, and that was partly because of one particular historian who I met early in the process, and I was very young. I was only 22. Who was very stern with me, and he said, you have to finish this, although I told him it was a history book, because I was very embarrassed to tell him that it was a novel. Then when I revealed to him in a kind of big reveal that actually I had been writing a novel all along, and he was thrilled. He said, oh, that's much better. But I was so worried that he was going to be upset with me. But he was very important in my mind. I guess maybe I required this at the time. As somebody that I had to complete the task for, that he was going to be disappointed in me if I didn't finish it. And it was, it took me a long time. It took 5 years, and I was kind of moving in the dark. So at that point, that was very important to me. Of course, I had a quite specific political motivation for writing that book. It was a book set before 1948, about Nablus, on a family story and so forth. And so this was sort of infused with a certain kind of, obviously, politicized mission. But I required this kind of elderly man and the specter of his disappointment, I guess, to kind of keep me going through it.
Okay. Thank you, Isabella. I wanted to see if we wanted to open the floor to questions. Yes.
Thank you, Bella. That was really great. I have a question about symbols, which you mentioned fleetingly at one point. But one of my frustrations with discourse around Palestine in the arts and policy and all kinds of spheres is the over-reliance on symbols, the key, the olive tree, the outline of the kharita وهيك. I'm curious about how, in a book that would so easily succumb to symbols, or would be so easy to fall into the seductive trap of symbols, how you try to dodge those in the writing process.
Great question. Yeah, I mean, so it's sort of a joke in the book. The first banter scene amongst the cast is how they're going to stage Hamlet, and they're sort of all proposing direct analogies with the political situation. Here is Hamlet a fidei, there's the line, something rotten in the state of Denmark. Is Denmark Israel? Is Denmark Palestine? Are we going to make the ghost of old Hamlet Arafat, and so forth? So there's sort of like they're kind of joking about this. And the director, Mariam, she's got this real sense of mission. She wants to put on a really good play. She's cast a pop star as Hamlet, so she has a bit of trouble there. But she really doesn't want to use symbols like this. She says she's bored of these symbols. She wants to create something new. So it sort of, I was sort of in a playful way trying to engage with that, not by dismissing those symbols, but by engaging with what it means to engage with those symbols in a sense. Obviously, the kind of literary echo, or the kind of reference, she's returning to Haiffa. So there's obviously a reference to Kenafani, right? And they go to see the old family house, but there's a twist, which is that the family actually sold the house in Haiffa after the Nakba. So there's a kind of way in which that you're also haunted by these old literary echoes, these old symbols in their different permutations. So I get to kind of play with them without necessarily making a point as such, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. I'd like to continue by asking you, how do you see the link between your first novel and the second novel, or the contrast? You talked a little bit about why you wanted to write the first novel. I managed to have read the first novel. I haven't read the second one yet, and I'm looking forward. But it seemed that you changed the pitch and you changed focus, and I would like to understand more what motivated you to write each, or how do you see the link between the two?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, they're obviously very different. The first one is a historical novel. It's in the third person. It was based on a lot of research. I think in a way maybe the second novel was a reaction to that, in that, the discipline that it took me to do all of that historical research and kind of that sort of discipline. There was another kind of the other kind of Janus face. Another novel was sort of starting to germinate in my mind, so that by the time I finished that one, I was actually quite ready to write something really different. That was different in tone, that kind of used different kinds of methods, that was seeking different kinds of aesthetic answers to certain questions I was asking. Obviously, they're linked in other ways. There are echoes throughout them which reflect my own interests in obviously Palestine, obviously Palestinian history, but also modes of hybridity and kind of mixedness. I think you can see that in both of them. Obviously, I'm that's kind of my own background as well, and literary mixing as well. So those things you could see in both, but they are very different texts. And maybe I'm just going to be that kind of writer who just wants to do something totally different, or gets bored, or kind of wants a change. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
Isabella, thank you very much for another lovely experience. I just started reading the book, and listening to Daalya and to you talking about the two genres of theater and novel and story makes it really an interesting kind of reading. And I feel like I am the viewer. I'm in a theater and watching something that is being played into a territory like Haiffa and that area of Palestine that I'm not at all familiar with, at least not the recent. And so I'm intrigued, and I'm happy, as I told you, that you're taking me as a Palestinian who's living in this part of Palestine into another adventure of experiencing something on the ground in a different location, although Palestine. And it's a sad feeling, is that because it emphasizes the barriers, and yet you brought me to the beginning with Rashid and his hunger strike as a turning point for the two sisters, how they looked at themselves, the mother, the uncle who brought them to see what's happening in the West Bank. Now we're going to go, we go to Haifa and we go to Jaffa to see what's happening there. So reading your book, at least the first few pages, is giving me a lot of moving experience. So I'm looking forward to the rest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. That's really wonderful to hear.
Thank you very much, both of you, for such an engaging conversation. My question, I suppose, is more of, it's the flip side of Zina's question, really, about symbols, and it's about authenticity. Now, I'm also one of these people who's read The Parisian and looking forward to reading Enter Ghost. But one of the things that struck me about The Parisian was not only how important the details were in not only making someone who knew nothing about Palestine feel as if they were there, but also, writing something that was true to your Palestinian audience. And it struck me that was very difficult to do for something that was 2 generations ago. Perhaps it's even more difficult to do for something that's set much more recently. So my question is really, how as a writer do you try to capture that authenticity and make sure you're paying kind of due homage to your audience and to your people? And secondly, to what extent was the choice of using theatre embedded within the form of fiction and the novel a way of allowing your characters to explore something else? Or was that really not part of the reason that you structured it in this way and used this form? Thanks.
Well, to answer your first question, I usually turn writing, which is a very solitary activity, into a very social activity. I consult a lot of people. I do quite a lot of research. I have a lot of readers. I bother all my friends to read them. 2 of them sitting right there. So they're kind of, I rely on others in a way, actually, to spot things I wouldn't have spotted, hello. There are kind of certain legal things in the book that I had to ask lawyer friends to check up, that sort of thing. I think in a way, most novelists do this, in fact. Even if they don't make a big hoo-ha about doing research, most novelists do research because you're trying to write something that extends beyond the self. And unless you're omniscient, that does require researching, asking people. I spoke to actors about their experience of acting quite a lot. That actually really helped me, both here but also elsewhere. So that sort of answers, I guess, that part of it. Of course, the first book was a different story because it was historical. So I harassed a lot of historians, and I did a lot of kind of, obviously spent a lot of time in the library and archives and so forth. But I do think that this question of theatre, I think, is interesting. I think the idea of performance in general. So I was using theatre as a way of obviously looking at not obviously, but I was trying to look at the ways in which military rule can actually be very theatrical, that there is lots of elements of the Israeli regime that actually are highly performative. The soldiers themselves are very performative, and that a lot of displays of power are actually very performative as well. And then obviously the flip side of that are the ways in which protest is also performative and makes use of spectacle. But there are these kinds of ways in which people have roles, they have uniforms, they have certain things that signify what their role is, what their identity is, and sort of was trying to tap into that, among other things, through using theatre. And that gets to be playful for me as well. But I'm also obviously interested in the history of theatre in Palestine as being an art form that has suffered specifically from censorship because it makes use of those things, because it's quite kind of, it can be spontaneous, it can be unpredictable, it has to do with bodies in space, in a regime that is about, governing and controlling bodies in space. So those are also elements that I got to draw upon in that way. Was that kind of what you were asking? Kind of, yeah. Okay, good.
I think my question is connected to the previous one, because there's a part in the book, and I didn't finish it yet, so bear with me. There's a part where indeed the protagonist, that perspective switches to the theater exercises and the group coming together and having a conversation, which for me as a reader was a huge switch, because the protagonist suddenly steps into a context and engages with the people around her, where before that she was kind of detached, I felt. And I was curious about the choices that you made describing that part of the book, you know, the conversations, but also there are these paragraphs where you describe each character and you take the time to describe their background, whether they're politically awake or not. For me, it showed the diversity of Palestine. Was that a conscious choice, and for which audience do you make those choices? Because here we have someone that obviously feels connected, and someone that is probably with a very different background that also feels connected to the book. So I'm just thinking in terms of how you make those choices as a writer.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I certainly wanted to tap into the diversity of Palestinian society, and so the play is a kind of models a way of being with one another that Dalia's talking about, and it's drawing Palestinians from across the society, with the exception of Gaza, because I felt that was unrealistic, though there's that absence is gestured to. So that was definitely something I was drawing on, right? But I think that there is this balancing act to be done when you're writing in English about Palestine, which is that you have more than one audience. You have an audience that is going to understand certain things and might be bored by other things, and then you're going to have an audience that doesn't, most likely doesn't know things. So I kind of walk a line with, and I think I prefer to under-explain than to over-explain, but there are times when you also want to be accessible and you want to let people in. So what I end up feeling is that actually there's more than one level on which to read the text, that actually one audience will read certain things and another audience will read different things, and that's okay as well. You know, they have a different experience.
Thank you, Isabella, for coming and sharing this lovely conversation with us. I have two short answer questions. The first is, I wonder if the two sisters and their different stances and experience embodied maybe different stages of your own relationship with Palestine. And then my second question is, do you think your following books will also relate back to Palestine, or will you ever venture off into something else?
Well, I think all fictional characters express some element of the psyche of the author, but it can be a very small element that you just draw on. You know, sometimes you do totally draw from outside the self, but I think that it's the closest material you have to you. I don't know that they really represent flip sides of me, or at least I'm maybe not capable of gauging that. Maybe somebody else would be able to tell me that. I don't think so, but there are certainly things that I drew on that then I expanded upon, you know. But as you might do even with a bad character, you're going to look for what part of yourself might have that bad feeling or whatever, and then try and draw on it. And that's part of the kind of the action, which is both using the self and also suppressing yourself in order to write about an invented character or someone who is not you. I don't know how satisfying, because it's a sort of yes and a sort of a no, really. And then to your second question, my next book is actually set around the Bandung Conference of 1955. So I'm kind of looking at the beginnings of non-alignment and the kind of third world project. So it's sort of not about Palestine, but it's, you know, it came from wanting to think about the Palestinian struggle in the mid-20th century in an international framework, which is what's led me to that. But my protagonists are Lebanese and Indian, so I'm moving away a little bit. Thank you very much for coming.